Behind the most impenetrable walls, in the depths of cells sealed with steel, there are men whom even other criminals prefer not to look in the eye. Today, for the first time, one of them has been captured on camera. This is not just another video. It's a look into the face of terror, the most chilling, feared, and dangerous men to ever step foot in a prison, each with a story that sends chills down your spine. And as we move forward, you will get to know who they are, not just for what they did outside, but for what they are capable of inside, from the least unsettling to the one who embodies absolute fear, the man no one dares to face, the most feared of them all. If you're sensitive, you might want to look away. But if you choose to continue, prepare to step into the darkest side of confinement. Number 10. We begin this list with a man who didn't inspire fear through his strength, but through his cold and dangerous intelligence. Richard Lee McNair wasn't your typical violent prisoner. He didn't need a weapon or an accomplice to escape. He just needed time. Time, and his calculating mind. In 1987, McNair was convicted for murder during a failed robbery. But what really terrifies isn't what he did. It's what he was able to do again and again from inside prison. His first escape seemed like a magic trick. He used lip balm to slip out of his handcuffs and disappear. 4 years later, he slipped through the ventilation ducts like a ghost. But his most baffling act came in 2006. He hid among mail sacks in a prison work center and walked out. As if he were invisible, an officer intercepted him hours later, running near some railroad tracks. McNair didn't hesitate. He invented a false story on the spot, posing as a courier who was staying at a nearby hotel. And the officer let him go. They called him the modern Houdini. But behind that media label is a chilling truth. McNair proved that even the maximum security system can fail when faced with someone who thinks every step with surgical precision. His story ended in 2007 when he was recaptured after a chase in Canada. He is currently serving a life sentence at ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States, where he spends 23 hours a day in total isolation. He may not have terrified his peers with brutal violence, but every guard who watched over him lived with the same fear. What if he does it again? Number 9. If Richard McNair represents the terror of the mind that plans in silence, the next man on the list is the complete opposite. He doesn't escape, he confronts and destroys. His attacks are so unpredictable that no guard feels safe by his side. Even in prison, he's managed to generate chaos, panic, and riots. He is the storm inside the cell. His real name is Michael Gordon Peterson, but the world knows him as Charles Bronson, a nickname taken from the action movie Star, because that's what he believes he is, an unstoppable force. Born in 1952 in the United Kingdom, he showed a violent, impulsive nature from a young age, prone to fights, uncontrollability, and constant challenges to authority. His criminal career began with an attempted armed robbery, but it was his time in prison that completely transformed him, not into an inmate, but into a living legend of chaos. Bronson has spent more than 40 years behind bars, most of them in solitary confinement. The reason? He's attacked guards, taken hostages, and sparked disturbances in nearly every prison he's been in. On one occasion, he held 2 hostages for hours, demanding a helicopter and a cup of tea as part of the ransom. Motivations? Sometimes he says he does it for art, other times for boredom. But no one is sure, and that's the real fear, not knowing when he will explode. While he was interned at Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital, he attacked other patients and took a doctor hostage, all while writing poetry books and training non-stop. He even published an exercise manual titled Solitary Fitness. Charles Bronson doesn't need a weapon. His body is his weapon, his mind, an unstable enigma. In 2023, he requested his release in a televised hearing. But after seeing his record, the British prison system decided once again, Bronson will not be released. Not because he's committed the most crimes, but because they've never been able to control what he's capable of. when the doors close. Number 8. Omaha, Nebraska, 2013. A man is released after spending more than a decade in prison for car theft. For years, authorities ignored his history of mental illness, and that mistake would cost lives. His name, Nico Jenkins, a disturbed individual who, just 2 weeks after his release, became the protagonist of a killing spree that paralyzed an entire city. On August 11th, he killed 2 men, Jorge C. Cajiga Ruiz and Juan Uribe Pena. He executed them with shots to the head and abandoned their bodies inside a vehicle, not for revenge, not for money, just because. The next day, he posed smiling for a photo next to Curtis Bradford, a former cellmate. Hours later, he killed him, his final victim, Andrea Kruger, a mother of 3. Jenkins pulled her out of her car and killed her in the street with a 12-gauge shotgun. When he was captured, his explanation was more chilling than the crimes themselves. He claimed to be possessed by Apophis, a serpent deity from ancient Egypt. He said the murders weren't his decision, but a divine mandate. During the trial, Jenkins represented himself. He laughed, spoke in tongues, interrupted the testimonies of the victims' families with incoherent phrases. Each session was a macabre spectacle, impossible to forget. He was sentenced to death, but his case sparked a new debate. Was he a ruthless murderer or a mentally ill man abandoned by the system? For his victims, there's no doubt. For his custodians, there's only one certainty. No one knows what Jenkins can do when the voices in his head speak again. Number 7. What we saw with Nico Jenkins was a mind torn by delusions and neglect. But the next man isn't crazy. His mind is clear, his voice is calm, and his motives are as cold as his gaze. He doesn't kill for pleasure, he doesn't kill randomly, he chooses and does so within the very prisons where others believe they are safe. Unlike the others, this man doesn't fear monsters, he hunts them. His nickname, the real-life Hannibal Lecter. But Robert Modsley is not fiction. He is a British killer on a mission, twisted and macabre, to eliminate other killers. His story began in the 70s, in London. Abused as a child, mistreated by his own father, Modsley grew up with a view of the world where justice is applied with hands, and the punishment is irreversible. His first crime was in 1974. He killed a man who had hired him as a sex worker, and was later discovered to be a child abuser. But that was just the beginning. While interned in psychiatric hospitals, Robert became increasingly aggressive. One night, along with another patient, he tortured and killed another inmate for 9 hours. No one heard the screams. No one noticed. Until it was too late. Already in prison, Modsley found his true purpose: to eliminate other criminals. In a single day, he killed 2 inmates. One, he strangled with his own hands. The other, he smashed his skull against a wall. Since then, the British prison system hasn't known what to do with him. They can't leave him with other prisoners, and they can't take him out. So, they built him a special cell made of glass, underground. An isolation box inspired by Hannibal Lecter's. He lives alone, without human contact, without visitors, without the possibility of release. He speaks to the guards through slots and waits. Because even now, in his total confinement, there's a latent fear. What if he's ever close to another criminal again? Number 6. Moscow, Russia. Between 2001 and 2006, dozens of people disappeared without a trace. Most of them were homeless, elderly, or vulnerable individuals. No one suspected that all these deaths shared the same author and the same plan. His name, Alexander Pichushkin. His nickname, the chessboard killer. From a young age, he showed unsettling signs: head injuries, isolation, cruelty toward animals. But what truly marked him was his fascination with murder. Pichushkin didn't kill impulsively. He did it like an experiment, a twisted game he designed for himself. He carefully selected his victims. He took them to Bitsa Park in Moscow, where he would throw them into a deep pit, or crush their skulls with a hammer, Sometimes he'd put bottles of vodka inside the fractured skull, just to see if they fit. When he was finally arrested, investigators found a chessboard in his home, and on it, 61 squares marked. Each one represented a life. His goal was to complete the 64th. In interrogations, Pichushkin showed no remorse. On the contrary, he was upset that he hadn't reached his goal. He said, without flinching, "To kill gave me life." He was sentenced to life in prison in 2007, confined in an isolation cell. But even now, prison officers say his gaze remains the same. Empty, precise, lethal. He wasn't seeking fame. He wasn't seeking money. He just wanted to play his game and have you be one of his pieces. Number 5. If hell had a face, it might look like Carl Panzram's. Born in 1891 in Minnesota and from childhood, he was a victim of brutal abuse in reform schools. But what emerged from that suffering wasn't compassion. It was a burning, uncontrollable hatred against all. By the age of 11, he was already stealing. By 15, he was in prison. And throughout his life, he committed over 20 murders, according to his own confessions, and hundreds of rapes, many of them against other prisoners. His violence knew no bounds. When he escaped, he left bodies. When captured, he attacked guards. His specialty? Destroy everything around him. He stole ships, set churches on fire, and killed without blinking. And when he wrote about his crimes, he did it with a coldness that sends chills down the spine. In one of his letters, he said, "I don't believe in man, in God, or in the devil. I don't need any of them. I have enough hatred inside me to kill the entire human race." He was sentenced to death in 1930, and during his execution, he asked for no forgiveness. When the executioner asked if he had any last words, he replied, "Yes, hurry up, son of a bee. I could have killed a dozen men while we were waiting." Carl Panzram wasn't a monster hiding. He was a monster who knew exactly what he was, and was proud of it. Number 4. Carl Panzram hated humanity. But what you're about to meet now is worse, because the next man on the list didn't kill out of rage, but out of obsession. His story didn't take place in a big city, but among the mountains and villages of South America, where his trail remained invisible for years. He was given 2 words that froze the blood of an entire continent: the monster of the Andes. Born in Colombia in 1948, Pedro Alonzo Lopez had a childhood marked by abandonment, abuse, and hunger. He was expelled from home at the age of 8 and lived on the streets, where he learned to survive amid violence and darkness. But what began as a tragic life ended in a nightmare for hundreds of families. Between 1969 and 1980, Lopez roamed Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, leaving a trail of death that seemed impossible to track. His victims, girls. His method? Kidnap them, abuse them, and then bury them. When he was finally captured in Ecuador in 1980, he confessed to having killed more than 300 girls. The authorities didn't believe him, until he led the police to mass graves hidden in the Andes, where dozens of bodies appeared. Pedro didn't cry. He didn't break down. He only spoke of his crimes with a disturbing calm, as if narrating the plot of a movie that he had directed. He was sentenced to 16 years in Ecuador. Yes, only 16. In 1994, he was released for good behavior, deported to Colombia, where he was interned in a psychiatric hospital. 3 years later, he was also released. Since then, no one knows where he is. Is he still alive? Did he kill again? The only thing known is that his face, once captured on camera, remains a symbol of what the system couldn't stop. Number 3. Colombia, 90s. Dozens of children disappeared without a trace. No one knew how nor who, only that the bodies would appear days later, mutilated, burned, abandoned in sugarcane fields or on the side of rural roads. What the police didn't know was that the responsible person was walking among them. He greeted, he smiled. Sometimes he offered candy or work. His name, Luis Alfredo Garavito. His nickname, the Beast. He confessed to having killed more than 170 children, although investigators believe the real number exceeds 300. Garavito had a system, a pattern. He constantly changed his physical appearance, used disguises, glasses, crutches, religious or teacher outfits, and gained the trust of his victims to take them away. Then, he tortured them, he raped them, and finally, he killed them, all while crying or apologizing, as if trapped between his conscience and his sadism. He was captured in 1999, and in one of his confessions he said, "I know I deserve death, but I ask for a second chance to help." He was sentenced to 40 years in prison, the maximum penalty in Colombia. But due to collaboration with authorities, legal reductions, and good behavior, there is a possibility that he will be released. For many families, that idea is not a threat. It's a nightmare that never ends. Number 2. If Garavito's actions were unimaginable, the next man erases the line between human and monster. He didn't just kill, he didn't just dismember, he went beyond, to the point that the people around him, without knowing it, became part of his horror. He didn't kill out of revenge, nor out of impulse. He killed for control, and for a reason no one wants to accept. Because when the truth came to light, it was too late. Baltimore, United States. At first glance, Joseph Metheny was just a large, dirty, quiet man. Some said he was kind, others that he was strange. No one imagined that, deep within that body, lived total darkness. Metheny confessed to having killed at least 10 people. Although many believe the real number is higher, most of his victims were vulnerable women, whom he kidnapped, tortured, dismembered, and then cooked. Yes, Joseph Metheny served human flesh in hamburgers. He set up an improvised stand by the roadside and sold his product to truckers and passersby who never suspected what they were eating. He confessed, "I opened a food stand and sold the flesh of those women. It tastes just like pork. If you mix it well, no one notices the difference." He kept the remains in makeshift refrigerators, and when he ran out of meat, he went out looking for another victim. He was arrested in 1996, and during interrogations, he showed no remorse, just laughter, just details no one asked for, but that he offered with morbid satisfaction. He was sentenced to life in prison. He died in prison in 2017 without ever expressing guilt, and without many of his customers ever knowing what they ate. Joseph Metheny was not just a killer. He was a brutal reminder of how far the human mind can go when led by absolute perversion. Number 1. So far we've walked through the most twisted minds. The irrational hatred of Karl Panzram, the obsession of Pichushkin, the perversion of Metheny, and the horror that Lopez and Garavito left behind. But what man could be more terrifying than everything we've seen? The most feared is not always the strongest. Sometimes it's the one who smiles while describing how he devoured another human being. Paris, 1981. A young Japanese man, shy, polite, with an innocent appearance, invited a university classmate to his apartment. He told her he wanted to read her a poem. She accepted and never left. His name was Issei Sagawa. When the young Renee Hardevelt turned her back, he shot her in the neck. Then he abused her lifeless body and began eating it. He did it for days, photographing every part, slowly chewing each piece. He kept body parts in the fridge, and others he tried to throw into a lake, but he was captured before he could do so. The police found photographs, remains, and confessions written with a chilling coldness. At the trial, Issei claimed he did it out of love. He wanted Renee to be part of him forever. He was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial in France and deported to Japan. But there, a legal loophole allowed him to be freed in less than 2 years. Yes, he killed, he abused, and ate a person. And still, he walked free. For years, he was invited to TV shows. He wrote books. He drew comics about his crimes. He became a celebrity. In an interview, he said, "Eating her was like experiencing beauty. I don't regret it." He died in 2022 from natural causes, without ever paying for what he did, without ever being imprisoned like the other men on this list. And perhaps that's why he is the most terrifying. Because true fear is not just in what someone can do, but in the world allowing it.